Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
All the most amazing encounters usually happen at a moment when a person is not at all prepared for them. Somewhere in a bakery when he pops out just for a minute to buy bread, or at a gas station. Nancy had such an encounter in a supermarket where she was pensively looking at the shelves and moving slowly down the aisle. It was late evening. Nancy was very tired and had difficulty adding up the figures in her mind, calculating whether the contents of her purse would be enough for all her purchases, or whether it would be prudent to postpone something for another time. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she did not notice how she crashed into someone else's cart. "I'm sorry, please," Nancy mumbled absent-mindedly. "I didn't mean to." She was not allowed to finish. To her amazement, the shopper jumped at her with a hug. "Nancy?" the stranger exclaimed. "I can't believe it. What an encounter." The woman repeated these words over and over again, and gradually Nancy's mind cleared. It was simply impossible to forget that husky voice. Betty replied she was surprised. "It's true. Your friend pulled Nancy away from her and gave her a picky look. And you haven't changed a bit," she concluded. "Still as poor and thin as ever. A real Snow White." "What kind of Snow White am I?" Why did Nancy laugh? "That's at 45. Princesses have no age," smiled her friend. "You are still as sweet and gentle as you were years ago. But life has taken its toll on me." "That's true." Nancy shook her head and did not speak ill of herself. "I think you've become a respectable lady. You're no longer the modest girl who was always in the library. You're more like the principal's office now. Tell me, you must have made a lot of progress in your career." "What's that?" Betty waved her hand. "Juvenile detention officer. Not much of a bird." She'd seen so much at work that she didn't want to have kids of her own. "Maybe it's for the best. I'll see if I can get them back on their feet. How about you?" "You haven't had any offspring yet." "No," Nancy said sadly. "My health didn't allow it. And now it's probably too late. What children at my age? But don't bury yourself before your time." Edifyingly, said her friend, peering into her cart. "Who is this doll for? Are you going to play with it yourself? Or Alex her birthday present?" "That's an original gift. Is it for Nicole?" answered Nancy. "Remember my music teacher? She taught me piano in high school. Said I was very talented and that I belonged on stage. And you let her down. So you're still socializing all these years later with your carts, with women's merchandise taking up half the aisle." And the other shoppers started grumbling their way around them. Betty looked around and grabbed her friend under the elbow. "Dueling from here," she said. "I don't think we belong here. Actually, you're in a big hurry. Maybe we could stop by my place. We can sit and talk for a while. Have some wine or coffee. I don't live too far from here." Nancy laughed. The hour was late and she didn't know what to do. Betty realized her doubts. "Are you afraid your husband will be offended?" she asked. "Alex, what is a tyrant?" "Not that." Nancy sighed. "Okay, let's go. Alex won't notice my absence anyway." They paid for their purchases and went outside. Nancy smiled, noticing a modest little Peugeot among the flashy cars. "You know, when I saw how different you've become," she confessed to her friend. "I thought you were a boss now, driving some Lamborghini. I was afraid I didn't belong with you." "You'll always belong with me," Betty assured her. "That's what friends are for, right? And now that you've calmed down and realized there's nothing to be afraid of, get in the car. We have to go fast before my ice cream melts. You'll see, even in this car, I'm quite the racer." But the woman didn't have to show off her talents, because the evening streets were jammed with cars. As they pulled up to Betty's house, Nancy had a new concern. "Would your William mind you bringing a friend home?" she asked. It was late after all. "What kind of guests are there now?" "My William hasn't had a say in this house for a long time," Betty grinned. "For the simple reason that he doesn't live in it." "Are you divorced?" "Disturbed?" Nancy asked. "Forgive me, I haven't known for 3 years," Betty confirmed. "And believe me, after so many years of such a marriage, I realize that freedom is more precious to me, enjoying life. And I can't understand how I put up with it for so long." Nancy fell into silence for a long time. They got out of the car and stay out of Betty's apartment. The woman immediately rushed to put the kettle in my hands and sit down at the table, she said. We're going to have a feast now. Let me help you. Nancy offered. No, you're my guest, objected Betty. So make yourself comfortable and rest. She poured the tea into cups. She sat down across from her friend and smiled. So tell me, how do you live? What do you do? Nancy shrugged timidly. What is there to tell? I live in general like everyone else. I cook for my husband. I go shopping. Nothing interesting. We haven't even been on vacation in a long time. Nothing to remember. Where do you work? Betty asked. Still at the same firm as an accountant. What am I saying? It's been 10 years since I last saw you. You've probably changed a dozen places by now. Nancy was very embarrassed and shook her head. Actually, I haven't worked anywhere in years, she replied. I've become a housewife. How so? Betty wondered. With your ambition. But I've always had a lot less ambition than you, Nancy said. But it's really quite simple. The organization I was working for closed down, and I was left on the street. Times were hard, and it was impossible to find a job right away. And then Alex was offered a promotion at his hospital. He thought it was our chance, last chance to have a baby. He told me to get properly examined, go to doctors, and not to worry about anything. He'd provide for a family with a baby. As you know, it didn't work out, and I stayed a housewife. I just got caught up in it. Alex talked me out of getting a job, said we had enough money for both of us. Now I'm mostly looking after the house, or making polymer clay jewelry to sell, and taking care of Nicole. I told you, I met her at the store the other day. Poor woman could barely walk with her cane. She has no children or grandchildren here. They all live in the capital, so I visit her once a week. I see what you mean. Betty stretched out with a strange expression on her face. You can't tell if she's judging or the other way around. Why, Alex? What do you mean? I don't get it, Nancy. Like what? You said he wouldn't even notice you were gone. I think if things were as rosy in your family as you're telling me, none of this would have happened. You notice all that? Nancy sighed. Nothing as bad as you might think happens in our lives. We don't fight, and Alex certainly doesn't raise his hand to me. He's just got so much work lately that he doesn't even notice. Are you home or not? Betty squinted. It's really weird. It's just that I get home before he does. Even when staying up late at Nicole's in our family, it's become a regular thing. It's still suspicious. Did the hospital suddenly get more work? Who's your cardiologist? We've had such a spike in heart disease in this town. We have to work around the clock. Betty, please. Don't push it, Nancy asked her friend. I don't know what to do with all this as it is. Good, Betty assured her. Last question. What time did Alex work until before this influx of patients? Was it until 5 or 6 that her friend smiled and shook her head? Nothing, I was just asking. And really, let's get off topic already. By the way, when was the last time you met Nina? From a class I was in. I saw her a couple months ago, and do you know who she married? Nancy was relieved. Their conversation had devolved into gossip and gossip. Cozy and safe. It's easy to discuss other people's lives when it's not about your own. They sat up until midnight. Nancy came to her senses too late. The buses weren't running at that time. No trouble, said not to be discouraged Betty. I'll get you a visa. No, that's inconvenient, objected Nancy. You could call a cab. I'm gonna call a cab for my friend. With my own car in the yard? Betty was indignant. Let's go. Nancy's house was not far from her friend's. Betty was pleased with that fact. We'll be able to see each other more often, she said, and I'll be waiting for you anytime. Nancy hardly listened to her friend. She looked at the house and her face widened at the darkness in the windows. Alex didn't seem to be back yet. Betty looked at the windows too, which is the one on the 3rd floor over there. Maybe he was too tired and went straight to bed when he got home. Maybe. I'm not sure, Nancy agreed. Actually, it's happened before. He came home from work at midnight once. Betty thought for a moment and asked if you wanted to get together again tomorrow. I don't mind, Nancy replied with a smile. Can we go to the ice cream parlor like when we were kids? You know that old one by the park? I think they haven't closed it yet. No, we're not going to the cafe. There's always time for that, Betty replied. We're going to watch your husband work at the hospital. Surprised Nancy. Who would let us in at this hour? Not the fact that your husband works in a hospital at night with a grim look, said Betty. So what do you say we follow your husband? Nancy hesitated. Her friend nudged her. I'm making up my mind. I remember when you were a student, you weren't so timid. Think about what you have to lose. If your Alex is pure as an angel, then our stakeout will be a simple, uncomplicated adventure. But what if we catch him in the act? Conducting investigations of any kind is not my job, Nancy said indignantly. What are you imagining, even if you did? So what are you afraid of? Question for question, answered Betty. Nancy sighed heavily, said goodbye to her friend, and went to her home. On the way, she prayed to the heavens that Alex would be home. Let him better sleep in peace, treacherously forgetting about his wife, than disappear unknowingly. Of course, such indifference would make her heart ache too. But not as much as if Betty's suspicions were justified. Nancy entered the apartment and immediately realized that her husband was not at home. His shoes weren't on the doorstep. The coat rack was empty. What sick people can be treated at this hour? She thought with irritation. Betty's words riven her soul. An old wound Nancy herself had long suspected wrong. But she tried not to think about it. What kind of secret life could Alex have? A mistress. But her husband? Goodness itself, prudence itself. He would never do such a thing to his wife. Though what feelings can be ordered? What if he fell in love with someone, but just because of his kindness, does not dare to tell his wife about everything? That would be very Alex-like. So you can think that my husband is involved with some criminals. Nancy grinned sadly. Trying to calm down, she put dinner on to warm up, and just in time. A few minutes later, a key rustled in the lock. Nancy rushed into the hallway. Finally, Alex, where have you been? Do you even know what time it is? I can't find a place to sit. The husband put his briefcase on the nightstand. He looked at his wife. I'm sorry, he came in heavy sick. I couldn't leave him, but he could leave me. For the first time in her life, Nancy complained, and immediately embarrassed by her outburst. I'm sorry. I realize your patients need you more than you do. While her husband changed his clothes and ate his soup, his wife watched him. She noted that Alex's head had added gray hair and new wrinkles had appeared on his forehead. Nancy's heart filled with compassion. Was it possible to suspect this man of any devious intent? He had, after all the cares of the day stamped on his face. She calmed down and put her friend's words out of her mind. But in the morning, when Alex was going to work, suspicions in her soul flared up with new force. I'll probably be back late today, dryly, her husband said. Yesterday's patient may need my help. If anything, don't wait up for me. Go to bed well, whispered Nancy, closing the door behind him. Betty seemed to read her thoughts and called after half an hour. How are you doing? She asked cheerfully. Not good, Nancy answered sadly. Alex came back last night as late as ever. He's going to be late today, too. I don't know what to think, and I don't know what not to think. I have to act. I'm ready to investigate. We're going out tonight to see where your husband's disappearing to. A friend picked up Nancy. At exactly 3:00 p.m., she took a thermos of tea and some homemade cakes, as she explained, to be on the safe side. Nancy smiled sadly at the sight of it all. I see you've prepared for everything, Betty agreed. If your husband's such a hard worker, we can't go hungry, can we? They parked near the entrance to the clinic and watched. They didn't talk much. Nancy wasn't in the mood. People were leaving the hospital, but Alex was not among them. Few people went inside at all. Soon the flow of people dried up completely. Betty clicked her tongue. I don't know what your husband is working on, but it's obviously not hospital business. Look, whispered Nancy. It's Alex. The husband walked out of the building and nervously glanced at his watch, heading for his car. Already done, Betty remarked. Wow, that was fast. And he told you he was working from morning till night. Let's go get him. With bated breath, Nancy asked. Sure, said her friend, Starting the engine. What's the point? Did we come here, or don't you want to know the truth? Nancy didn't know what she wanted. What she wanted more than anything was for all this uncertainty to end. As they maneuvered between other cars, the old Peugeot is now on the road. Headed for the center, Betty muttered, "I wonder what kind of sick person lives there." Alex drove for quite a while and didn't seem to notice the pursuit. Betty was beginning to get irritated. For a long time more, she nervously said, as if hearing her, the car stopped. Alex jumped out of the car and hurried into the driveway. "Notice he opened the door with his own key," Betty said. "He didn't use the intercom." "So what now?" Nancy asked in a low voice. "We wait. Probably call all the apartments and ask if the doctor came to see them." "That doesn't make sense," Betty said. "We'll wait. What have we got to lose a husband for?" Nancy answered her in her mind. "I could lose Alex." She said nothing aloud, realizing that it was useless to argue with her friend. And what solution could they really find? You can't go looking for Alex in the entryway. An hour passed. The husband still hadn't returned. More and more windows in the house lit up. People were coming home. Betty started the engine too. "There was no point in staying here any longer," she said. "Whatever time Alex gets out of here, he's bound to go home. Then we'll never know who he was meeting." Nancy asked in a low voice. Betty looked at her as if she were a little girl. "Please, can't a man who works for the police find the information he needs? Wait a couple days and all will be known." Nancy went home and went to bed, or rather pretended to sleep. She just could not imagine how she would look into the eyes of her husband when he returned. Alex didn't arrive until after midnight. He undressed and warmed his own dinner. That other woman apparently didn't feed him. Nancy thought bitterly, or had he not had the time? There was no doubt in her mind that her husband was cheating on her. Who else would he visit at home but some beautiful lady? And staying up late with her? Did he really have a mistress? And who? Nancy pretended to be asleep, but didn't fall asleep until the morning when the matchmaking began outside the windows. When did she wake up? Alex was already gone from the apartment. Apparently, he went to work, treating scheduled and unscheduled patients. Nancy immediately rushed to the phone. "What's up?" she asked her friend. As soon as she picked up the phone. "Any news?" "Not so fast," she answered. "I'll know something tonight or tomorrow." "Have patience. If only I had any left," Nancy muttered. She spent the whole day unable to find her place. To the woman's surprise, Betty contacted her in a most ingenious way. "Ring the intercom. Come down to my car," said her friend. "There's a conversation to be had." Betty's voice sounded so strained that Nancy's heart nearly jumped out of her chest. She realized that her friend knew something and was afraid to find out, which was exactly what Nancy ran outside as she was in her house row. Got into the car and hurriedly inquired, "Hi, what's the news?" Betty held out some papers to her. "I got a list of the tenants in that building through a friend." "What's it say?" the woman asked excitedly. "Take a look for yourself. There's a familiar name." Nancy took the letters offered to her by the paper with shaking hands, so bouncing in front of her eyes that it was very difficult to make out anything. Managing herself, she plunged into reading. The tenants of the first floor were unfamiliar to her, but on the second floor, apartment number 5, Adriana. Adriana, so she never married or changed her maiden name. I read it. How's that for a twist? I was shocked to see her name myself. We're having some kind of reunion, only in a bad way. Betty was right. Fate was laughing at them. They didn't know each other. In fact, they'd been in the same class and had been thick as thieves during their college years. Nancy, Betty, and Adriana, this trio knew the whole stream. Not because they were very bright or talented. It was just that their company was too peculiar. Betty was a typical nerd with huge glasses on her nose and hair gathered in a bundle. Nancy was unexpectedly carried away by all those years. Light. Otherwise, then in sports uniforms on the pairs did not appear. And Adriana only beauty queen natural blonde with huge, like the heroine of Japanese cartoons, eyes. Surrounding only marveled at how such unlike each other girls were able to become friends. Probably the friends themselves would not be able to answer this question. a simple coincidence. In the first year of the girls sat at the same desk and stayed together. If someone else had been there, it might have been different. How about we skip class today? Adriana asked. It seemed like a May afternoon. Sitting in higher math in this weather, it's a sin. It would be a sin if I didn't get the machine gun I was promised. Betty muttered. Do you think I raised my hand at every seminar for nothing? The nerd muttered to Adriana and turned to her other friend for support. And you're going to learn integrals too. Nancy shrugged. Exams are coming up. I think Betty's right. It's better to work hard now and then live in peace. Adriana was getting frustrated and complaining about how boring her friends were. But fortunately, not for long. Suddenly it turned out that a conference had canceled the class. You're a real witch, muttered Nancy Adriana. When did they leave the institute? I wouldn't be surprised if you sent some kind of mental request into space. And the lecture went off. Adriana laughed contentedly. Being compared to a witch didn't offend her in the least. On the contrary, it flattered her. The day was similar, and the girls went to the park. Adriana had recently received a money transfer from her parents, and she'd gone all out. Today I want to try everything, she told her friends, starting from cotton candy and ending with that carousel over there. It's for kids under 5. A closer look informed Betty. You're a little late with your desire, excellent phrase did not confuse Adriana in the least. She treated her friends to ice cream and then took them to the Ferris wheel. Later, as they sat resting on a bench, Nancy nudged Adriana with her elbow. Here comes the fortune teller, she said. You said you wanted to try everything. Don't you want to know your future? Adriana squinted, glanced at the woman. This isn't even a gypsy. Disappointed, the girl said, and dressed too simply a plain house robe. What makes you think that? That it's a sorceress? She looks like an ordinary old woman. She came up to me once before, Nancy explained. She works in this park all the time. I didn't have any extra money that time, so the fortune teller left with nothing. But if you're not denying yourself anything today, Adriana nodded cheerfully. The future's decided. I just hope she doesn't tell me I'll die in the prime of my life. Woman, come to us, please. She was a plain old woman of about 80 in a robe. She was no different from a lot of grandmothers. And the girls had almost no doubt that all her predictions would be pure quackery. And yet the desire to touch the unknown was stronger. Hello, you are a fortune teller. Adriana asked cheerfully. When the old woman approached them, she nodded and answered with some pride. Yes, girl. I read tarot cards. The old woman's speech impressed the girls. No matter what they thought, there was no mistaking it. But it sounded very reasonable, not like the noble charlatans who belong at the fair. I'm also psychic, the old lady added. I see in images. I'm looking at you right now. I see pictures of your future. Very vivid pictures. Her friends listened to her as if mesmerized. Even Adriana, who was skeptical, began to listen to her more attentively. And what do you see in my fate? The girl asked. The old woman looked expressively at her purse. Adriana sighed. Ah, yes, money. Here, take this. The fortune teller tucked the bill into her pocket and directed a hard stare into Adriana's face. She was silent for so long that the girl felt uneasy. But what shook her voice? She asked, What do you see? The fortune teller wished with her lips and said you will meet soon your destiny a man who will love you. It will be a brunette with blue eyes, but you will not find happiness with him. Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Adriana muttered. I can't say it enough. That's nice. Why should I not find happiness with him if, as you say, he will love me more than life? The old woman ignored her question and turned to Nancy. I can tell your fortune, she said. For nothing. Your friend has already paid enough. Nancy looked at her friends uncertainly. I don't even know, she mumbled. What if you say something bad? In that case, it's probably best not to know the future at all. Go ahead, Nancy nodded at her, still reserved. Adriana is about to tell you what it will be like to have a man who loves you and brings nothing but nasty things into your life. The old woman paid no attention to this barb and continued to look at Nancy. She sighed. All right, if you like it so much, guess only please. If you see something bad in my fate, you'd better not tell me about it at all. I don't want to live and be afraid of tomorrow." The old woman nodded and took her hand. Nancy shuddered at that touch of her palm. The fortune tellers turned out to be as cold as ice. "I see that you will meet. You will soon your destiny." The old woman stretched out in a low voice. "The man you love. It will be a brunette with blue eyes." "I think you said the same thing to me." Adriana interrupted her. "Didn't you have another fairy tale in mind?" "She said the brunette would love you," Betty corrected her gently. "And here Nancy will love the brunette." There was a difference, though. Not much. Adriana frowned. "I think it's all fraud and quackery, and there's nothing more for us to talk about. Goodbye." "As you know, my girls, as you know," as if nothing had happened, muttered the old woman and went away. "What have you done?" Nancy was upset. "Wouldn't let me hear the rest of it. Why should you listen? Lies?" Adriana was surprised. "If you want me to tell you something, I'll tell you myself. It's a big deal." "She didn't say anything to me," Betty sighed. "I guess I'm not expecting anyone in my life, neither brunettes nor blondes." "I'm fine without them," Adriana assured her. "You know what, girls? Let's get out of here. It's the old lady. I'm in no mood for fun." The girls headed for the exit of the park. The fortune teller's prediction was unbelievable, but it kept going through everyone's heads. "It's interesting," Betty said. "The brunette will love Adriana, and Nancy will love the brunette." "Nancy will see your fiancé, Adriana, won't she?" "Never in my life." Nancy swore fearfully. "No matter how much I like the guy, I'll never drive his girlfriends." "I only," muttered Adriana grimly. "Girlfriend or not." "But so who's driving?" "My boyfriend. Maybe don't expect mercy." Nancy never realized that time in jest. Or did the always cheerful Adriana say the phrase seriously? They never brought up the unfortunate prophecy again, or rather did not talk about it among themselves. Yet Nancy no, I wondered if it was a hoax or a very real picture of their future. Years went by. No prince appeared on their horizon. Adriana had bright looks, was popular with the boys, but never seriously dated anyone. "What kind of suitors are these?" she asked when her friends asked her opinion about this or that guy. One barely graduated from technical school. "He'll spend his whole life in some tire shop. Dirt and oil all over him." Another is a cook in a factory canteen. The third is an orphan. What difference does it make whether he's an orphan or not? Betty wondered. "I thought an orphan was less trouble. No mother-in-law to bother you, or any other relatives." Adriana looked at her friend as if she had said something stupid. "There is a difference, and a huge one," she said indignantly. "If a guy has rich parents or influential relatives, then he will go far in life as a factory worker and so sad all his life. Didn't even see the world. If you're going to go high, you're going to go high. Understand? So you want a rich man," mumbled Betty. "But go for it, and we'll see when you find him." Adriana paid no attention to her sarcasm. The girl was confident in herself and her future victory. "If not a millionaire, then some intellectual will definitely be mine," she said. Luck smiled on her in the 4th year. Completely unexpectedly and under rather tragic circumstances, girls invited to her birthday one of the classmates. Faith is not that the friends often communicated with her, but they could not refuse such an offer. Mainly, the trip was insisted on by Adriana. Faith's parents have such a house outside the city. She marveled. A 2-story mansion. That's where you should meet princes. You can't invite a pauper to a place like that. Only the most worthy gather there. Her friends looked at each other. Nancy saw the expression written on Betty's face. She herself was that silent, questioning girl. Adriana was originally from the village. Her father worked on a tractor, drank often, and she herself lived in a hostel, occasionally dropping in on her girlfriends for home-cooked dinners. What did she call it? Adriana's desire to escape poverty was understandable. Betty and Nancy also lived poorly, but still more prosperous than their friend. That's why they weren't attracted to big money. Adriana was serious, wearing makeup like she was going to the Oscars. She asked some friend of hers for a fancy dress. Her friends made fun of her. "If there aren't any millionaires at the party, all your efforts will be for nothing." Nancy used to tell her, "Or turn into a pumpkin at midnight." "If you ruin someone else's dress," Betty added. "I don't know much about it. but I think it's worth a lot of money. It'll be just right, I'm sure, Adriana declared. It's worth the gamble. I know it for a fact. I heard from a girl that the son of some car wash or travel agency executive is coming to the party. I don't know. The important thing is that the guy's not poor. And if this guy isn't poor, why is he still going out alone? Betty asked. Adriana brushed off her grumbling. But the honors student was right for once for the holidays. Adriana was completely baffled to learn that the headmaster's son had shown up at the mansion with his girlfriend. Looks like a typical photo model. With legs from her ears it is. She said in a low voice, taking a glass of champagne from the table. All my efforts have been for nothing. What are you going to do? Careful, asked Nancy, not knowing how to comfort her friend in this situation. Dance, replied Adriana. To have fun anyway on this holiday, I have nothing to catch. Nancy drank champagne and went into the crowd with a dancing gait. Her friends looked at her and looked at each other, and still Adriana does not lose her optimism. Betty said with a smile, What are we going to do? I don't really know how to dance. How do you know? I can't dance either. Nancy picked up on it. I twisted my ankle in the relay last year. My ankle still hurts. Why don't we just go for a walk in the garden? I don't like all that noise anyway. I only came here for the pebbles. So they did. For an hour, they walked along the paths and sat in the gazebo, listening to the cacophony of sounds coming from the house. Finally, Betty's patience ran out. I'm hungry and I want to go home. Let's get something from the table, eat, and go to the bus stop. If we sign on, we can still catch the last bus. And Adriana can dance if she wants to. We're not her babysitters and my legs aren't made of steel. We'll be here till morning. Should we leave her here in doubt? Nancy asked. It doesn't seem right. After all, she is our friend. Then let's bring her along, said Betty. Let her decide whether her friends or her fiancés are more important to her. They went back to the house and were just in time for the drama to begin. It didn't start out dramatic, but just ugly. One of the guests got drunk or just had a terrible clumsiness and dropped a bottle of wine in the kitchen. Shards flew in all directions. It is not known why Adriana came into the kitchen. Maybe the girl, like her friends, was hungry and also went out for a snack or was attracted by the sound of breaking glass. Whatever the case, her decision to visit the kitchen turned out to be wrong. Adriana's shoes were already extremely uncomfortable, narrow, and high-heeled. The girl had been cursing them since she bought them. Stepping into the kitchen, she didn't have time to realize what was wrong. When her foot slipped on the wet linoleum, the girl cried out and fell to the floor. Almost immediately, her scream was even louder. The Gawkers present in the kitchen did not immediately realize what had happened. The floor was drenched in the red of her dress. The girl's was too, so no one noticed the blood on her leg. But Nancy proved to be the strongest observer. And Adriana, are you bleeding? She screamed. I can see for myself, the girl moaned. It's not just blood. There's a piece of shrapnel stuck in it. It was a terrible sight indeed. A large shard of B, stuck in her leg, resembled a scene from a horror movie. No one dared to approach Adriana and give her help. Moreover, no one even knew what to do. For a while, all the people present, amazed, were silent, and then someone hysterically shouted doctor urgently. Where will you get him here? Answered another voice. Some guy rushed into the room. Alex hasn't left yet. Get him in here. Nancy couldn't understand. What did Alex have to do with this? Inside her, she was screaming for a doctor to call the emergency room. But she had no idea where to find a phone. Finally, some guy was dragged into the kitchen, dark, bald, stubby with a skinny, nervous face. Alex, you're a doctor. Shouted to see him off, and he got a job in your line of work. The boy looked at the blood running down Adriana's leg, and his face began to pale rapidly. Nancy, for some reason, decided that the stranger was about to faint and wanted to move to help. But somehow he managed to control himself and took a deep breath. I'm not a surgeon, he said, either to Adriana or to the audience. I'm going to be a cardiologist, to treat the heart, but that's what I'm going to do, the girl asked. If you don't help me now somehow, my heart will definitely stop from fear. So go ahead. The boy knelt down in front of him and looked at the wound for a long time. Then he said, "I haven't gotten my diploma yet. Just studying." "Do something," Adriana screamed and burst into tears. It seems that her tears had the desired effect on the understudied doctor. He came to his senses and asked someone to bring medical tourniquets or sheets of some kind. "Let's try to tighten the leg so there won't be much blood loss." "Aren't you going to pull the shard out?" Alarmed, Adriana asked. The guy shook his head no. Judging by the color of the blood, it could be an artery. It's better not to risk it and leave it as it is until the ambulance arrives. After such a statement, Adriana lost her senses. The young doctor had a lot more to worry about, and Nancy watched with admiration as he fussed over her friend. The guy was so timid at first, fearful, as if he had dissolved into his work. All fears seemed to have finally left him. The ambulance arrived half an hour later when Adriana had more or less regained consciousness and could answer questions. And her healer was sitting next to her and holding her hand. To the doctor's car, they all went together too. Adriana's friends wanted to go after them, but the ambulance doctor stopped them. "Did they make a cab for you?" he asked. "You can get to the hospital on your own if you want to." Fortunately, during the party, Adriana had a lot of fans, and there was no shortage of free cars. The ambulance was followed by almost all the guests. All this resembled a wedding cortege, and the party smoothly moved to the first floor of the surgical department. "Well done, Alex," someone shouted, clapping the tortured student on the shoulder. Dedication to surgery was successful. "I want to be a cardiologist." Must be the 100th time repeated tired guy. No one listened to him. Nancy modestly approached the guy to thank him. "Thank you so much. Your name is Alex, right? I'm Nancy, Adriana's friend. How nice of you to be there and to come to the rescue in time." The girl looked at him and felt something akin to what they call love at first sight. She felt an inexplicable sympathy for this guy as timid and nondescript as herself, as if she had suddenly found her other half. Nancy looked into the boy's eyes and shuddered. They were blue, and the curls on the medical student's head were cast in black. The girl remembered a prophecy long ago heard in the park he would never love her. As if confirming the girl's fears, Alex said, "Nice to meet you. So, what was the name of my first patient?" "Adriana." Of course he liked Adriana. The girl thought bitterly. And who wouldn't like her? Adriana did it all, dressed tastefully, made eyes at guys, and had the looks to match. How can I compete with a hottie like that? Nancy was pushed aside. The other guests wanted to congratulate Alex. Betty noticed her friend's upset face and approached her. "What's the matter?" "Are you upset because Adriana was unlucky?" "Yes," nodded Nancy. "In fact, thought the girl, the one who was unlucky, was me." Adriana was in the hospital for a few days, and she came out, looking like a winner. It took her friends a long time to figure out what was wrong, and she had the courage to show up and tell them her secret. That young doctor, Alex, came to check on me, and in my opinion, I made an effect on him, specially rolled his eyes, and pretended to be seriously ill. You know, it's one step from pity to love. He bought it, I know he did. That pretty boy's almost in my pocket. Nancy's heart sank at those words. She couldn't even find the strength to smile. Betty, the medical student, inquired incredulously, "And that's your idea of a decent match? The main thing is who his parents are." Adriana dismissed her father as the head doctor of the clinic. "That's a lot of connections. Yes, probably he will push his son up the ladder. With such ancestors, we won't be lost." Adriana broke up and started dreaming about 20 years ahead. Nancy looked at her with despair and thought about what a fool Alex was. How can you study to be a doctor and be so stupid not to see that you are not loved, but just want to be used? Relationship between Adriana and Alex developed quite rapidly, and the main merit in this belonged, of course, to the girl. The guy was quite shy and not confident in himself. He was embarrassed by the unexpected attention from such a beautiful woman. One could even say that it was Adriana who courted Alex, not the other way around. And after a few months, everything ended unexpectedly. At one of the parties, Adriana showed up with some beat-up guy and introduced him to her friends. "Meet Sam," Nancy and Betty mumbled confusedly, and some sort of greeting in return. Both were waiting for some sort of explanation from Adriana, and Nancy was even looking around for Alex. Maybe they just showed up at the party separately. Is this guy a new acquaintance and Adriana some brother from the village or a relative? Betty proved to be a much shrewder friend, glanced around at the gold chain around the guy's neck and the emblem on his jeans. She realized in no time at all that this was no distant relative. "Excuse me, please," smiled Betty at the bald man. "My friend and I have some lady secrets to discuss. We won't be long." Grabbing Adriana by the arm, she dragged this one to the farthest corner. Nancy was barely singing along behind them. "What are you doing?" Betty hissed with unprecedented fury, glaring at Adriana. "Where did that leak come from? And why do you need it? What about Alex? He's not a jock, he's my new boyfriend." She replied with an offended look, snatching her hand away. "What's wrong with that? You used to not care who or when I date." "We didn't know Alex before," Betty replied. "And Adriana, how could you do that to him? Was it his own fault?" Adriana snapped at him. "Like he's never been seen before. I had to push him all the time. Almost every date. I made the dates. And I kissed him first, too. Why would I want a guy like that? Maybe it's because Lesha doesn't have much money." "Like that jock?" Betty asked. "I haven't seen him wearing a gold chain like that. And his parents are probably poor. What do you care who I dumped and who I'm dating?" shouted Adriana. "Some moralists, they have no one themselves. But you're so eager to teach others. Loser." With a proud chin, the girl walked toward her boyfriend. Betty looked at Nancy and asked, "What do you think?" "I'm thinking about how Alex feels right now," the girl admitted. "I think he really liked Adriana. Or maybe he doesn't know what kind of bitch he's gotten yet," Betty said with a grim look. "I wouldn't be surprised if Adriana dumped her boyfriend and didn't even warn him about it. I'll have to check it out." Resolute told Nancy, "What if he slits his wrists out of grief or does something stupid? We have to be there for him." Betty shrewdly looked at her and shook her head. "You are, and I'm of no use there." "What do you mean?" Nancy asked. "Come on, I saw the way you were looking at him. This is your chance. Go for it, Nancy. I'll be holding my fists for you all the way to Alex's house." The girl was replaying those words in her head. Nancy was simultaneously uncomfortable that her friend knew how she felt, and happy that Betty believed she had a chance. Nancy knew where Alex lived. They'd gone over to his house once, all three of them for the guy's birthday. It was an old house on the outskirts of town, a small 19th century mansion that now housed several apartments. Coming here, Nancy felt like she was in a museum every time. "Who?" Alex's mother asked, an elderly, intelligent-looking woman in a house dress. "Hello, I'd just like to see him," Nancy said timidly. "He's home." "He is." The woman nodded. "Studying for his exams. Come in, please. Just for a moment. He can't be distracted. He has a difficult subject." Nancy nodded obediently and went into the room. The boy was indeed in his room, sitting, piled with books at the table, immersed in reading some folio. There was a plate of untouched dinner, which Alex had apparently forgotten about. The girl looked at the plate and once again thought that this guy's family was very different from all the others. Not many people eat dinner with a knife and fork in their own home. "Hi," said Nancy, coming into the room. "How are you?" Alex didn't seem upset or depressed. Apparently, he didn't know anything about Adriana's betrayal yet. He looked at Nancy and smiled. "Hello, you're all alone without a friend." There was no doubt that the boy was asking about Adriana. He could hardly have been interested in Betty. The two had hardly spoken to each other. One said slowly to Nancy, "Adriana is busy today. Is she studying for her exams too?" Alex inquired. Quite unexpectedly for her, he didn't notice her easy craving for knowledge, especially on weekends. "And on a day like today, do you know about the party?" Nancy asked. "I know," replied the boy. "Adriana said she was going, but I couldn't keep her company. Anatomy is my everything." Nancy thought of Adriana, who was probably dancing with her new boyfriend at that moment, and she felt disgusted. She decided not to beat around the bush, but to lay it all out in front of Alex. "Adriana is cheating on you," the girl said decisively. She showed up at the party with some Sam, whom she introduced as her boyfriend, and now she was probably having fun in his company. So she finally said it. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the guy's reaction and praying that this blow wouldn't be fatal for him. Alex put the book aside very slowly. It seemed that the upcoming important exam had lost all meaning for him. "That's for sure," he asked. "You're not lying to me." "What am I saying? Why would you lie?" "It's just that this is all kind of weird and unexpected, I'll admit." He reached for his plate, took his fork and knife, and absent-mindedly put a piece of meat in his mouth. He noticed the expression Nancy was looking at him with and grinned. "Don't worry, please. I'm not going to slit my wrists over something like that. It's just that when I get anxious, I get so hungry, I have to do something about it. I mean, it's nothing." "Surprised?" Nancy asked. "So you're not too worried about Adriana?" Alex shrugged. "What's the point of worrying? Adriana and I were never a perfect couple. It was obvious from the beginning. I made up my own mind. Now I'm paying the price. Besides, there are more tragic things in life. For instance, my grandmother died last year. That's probably a much bigger tragedy than cheating on a girl." Despite all these words, it was noticeable that the guy was just trying to comfort himself, to find some arguments to make himself not worry too much about what had happened. Nancy sat down next to him and sympathetically put her hand on Alex's shoulder. "Don't be upset about Adriana," the girl said quietly. "She's not worth it to you. You are much better than her. How can one friend talk like that about another?" The boy was surprised. "It's kind of wrong." Nancy shrugged. "I don't know. A friend probably can't, but I'm afraid of socializing. I don't have anything in common anymore. I won't be able to socialize with her." Nancy really wanted to cut all ties with her friend, to communicate with Adriana. She was disgusted further, mostly from the fact that she kept worrying about Alex. The girl didn't know how to approach the conversation with Adriana and tell her that they were no longer friends. But everything was resolved much easier. Adriana herself cut off all communication with her friends. First on them for the fact that they met Sam badly, and then she dropped out of the institute and went somewhere with her new boyfriend. She was the only one they saw. Nancy kept visiting Alex. She saw that the guy, despite all his assurances that everything was fine, was depressed and tried to support him. She did her best to get him out of the house and get him to unwind. I even managed to get her into the theater for a play. The girl hardly looked at the playbill and took the tickets without looking. In the end, it turned out that the performance was for children. That day, she heard Alex laughing for the first time in a long time. "I haven't seen anything like it in 20 years, he assured Nancy, red with shame. "But I liked it, really. Tell me, why are you trying so hard? What do you really want from me? Don't you have any idea?" asked the girl, embarrassed. "How stupid are you guys? Even if you study to be doctors." Alex looked at her carefully and said, "I think I guess." "I'm sorry, Nancy. I really enjoyed today, and so did you." They walked the rest of the way in silence, not laughing, looking at each other. But from that day on, something subtly changed between the young people. Soon they officially became a couple, and after graduating from Nancy University, they got married. Alex's parents did not hide their joy. Adriana was clearly not to their liking, and modest Nancy seemed like an angel against her background. The young people approached each other. Both were not talkative. They could spend a whole evening with each other without saying a word and not feel uncomfortable. Nancy actually thought she was happy in the whole routine, in the repetition of each other's days. She had forgotten the old fortune teller's prediction, and Adriana, who had disappeared from her life though, as it turned out, not forever. The friend of her youth showed up out of nowhere 20-odd years later to steal her husband away from her. There was no other way Nancy could explain Alex's evening absences. The list of tenants bounced in front of her eyes. She couldn't take her eyes off Adriana's last name, and at the same time she tried to assure herself that it was all just in her head. It can't be. Nancy muttered, "It's crazy. Or a coincidence?" Betty said dryly, "There's not a single apartment in this entryway. Who knows which one Alex is in?" And at the same time, the women realized that there was no such thing as coincidence. Wherever Adriana had come from, her intentions were hardly good. And why would Alex stay with her for so long? How could he do that? Nancy asked, wiping away her tears. He knows that Adriana never loved him, but just used him. And that's Sam's story he should remember. Does Alex really think that Adriana, after all these years, sang with feelings for him in his youth, failed? Decided to give it a try. Now it's a graybeard, Betty thoughtfully remarked. To tell you the truth, I don't know what the big deal is either. The Alex I knew years ago wouldn't have fallen for it a second time. But time passes and people change. Besides, you remember what Adriana was like, right? She had a way of charming the guy she liked. And as the years went by, she got more experience, wink wink. And your husband was reminded of the past. He swam or even just wagged his finger. For her, all this stuff was normal. Nancy tossed the sheet aside and wiped her hands squeamishly. Betty followed and asked what to do. Are you going to get a divorce? Nancy muttered. I can't go on living with Alex. It's just beyond me. Maybe you shouldn't be so hard on yourself, Betty asked. Wait for your husband to come home from work. Talk to him. Nancy laughed bitterly. You'll have to wait a long time to get home from work. He's probably working a double shift today. First at the clinic, then Adriana's. I don't want to tire him out anymore. Let him do what he wants, and where will you go? A friend asked Betty. Do you have a place to stay? At least for the first time. Nancy shook her head in confusion. I don't know what to do or how to go on living. My head was a complete fog. Betty sighed heavily. She hadn't expected anything else from her friend. Come to my place, Betty suggested. I'm alone in my bachelor pad. We'll have more fun together. Are you sure? Nancy asked hesitantly. I won't get in your way. Maybe you want to relax after work and have some quiet time. And here I'll be hanging around, she said confidently, calmly. This silence will soon make me want to howl in the evenings. Even the TV does not save, so move without thinking. You can pack your things right now. I'll wait. And so it was that at the age of 45, Nancy came to live with her friend. Like some college girl, not that they didn't both like it. Nancy missed the heartfelt female conversations that were so scarce during their married life. Betty, too, was glad that now, instead of an empty apartment in the evenings, she would have a table set by her friend, meals that a good canteen would envy. You should have studied to be a chef instead of an economist, she said at dinner one night. Such talent is wasted. Lots of talent, Nancy sighed. I cook, I do laundry. I can knit and make jewelry with my hands. The perfect wife and hostess. God, I wish I'd never gotten married. I'd be on my own. I'd probably be a chief accountant by now, moving up the ladder. Alex didn't call you anymore? Betty asked. Nancy shrugged indifferently. I don't know. I got tired of his calls, so I changed my number. But first I sent him a message telling him not to look for me. Alex doesn't deserve to be kept in the dark. Let him know I'm alive. But did you tell me why you left? Betty asked. I think he's still lost in that case, because he doesn't know why you left him so suddenly. I think that's about it. It's not hard to guess, Nancy muttered. And if Alex isn't clever enough, he'll only be able to figure it out when he's young. Nancy really wasn't worried about family drama at this point. It was where to get the money. She had no savings, and Nancy did not want to sit on her friend's neck. But the job hunt was harder than she thought and took a long time. Why haven't you worked in so many years? The personnel officer at one firm asked, looking at Nancy almost suspiciously, as if staying at home was a crime. Do you still have any knowledge of your profession? They were even more blunt elsewhere. I'm sorry, but we have a young staff, she was gently told. All of our employees are under 30 years old. Think about it. Would you be comfortable in such a company? Nancy almost replied that she doesn't care who you work with when you have nothing to eat. What did it matter who you shifted papers with? However, she knew that all her words wouldn't matter. If the HR people decided not to hire her, no amount of reassurances would fix the matter. I'm just the perfect wife, Nancy said bitterly, looking at another job site. I'm not good for anything else. God, what have I come to? If you don't want to accept money from me so much, why don't you be a wife? Betty asked. What do you mean? Nancy wondered. Well, there are ads like that. Husband for an hour, explained her friend. A complete stranger comes and fixes a faucet or, for example, furniture in your apartment. How are you worse? Give an ad that you can clean the apartment or cook dinner. I'm sure someone needs those services too. Incompetent people like me. My country is far from perfect, and the apartment was a real mess before you moved here. Nancy dismissed the idea for a long time, thought it was idiotic and even shameful. But in the end, she decided to give it a try, mainly because she kept a rough estimate in her mind of how much Betty was spending on her upkeep. The sum was not just impressive, but simply catastrophic. We had to act. Nancy placed her ad for nothing, not hoping for anything, and even laughed at herself for always carrying her phone with her, waiting for a call. However, she did get a call from a woman who was ill and needed help around the house. Then there was another customer, a lonely old man who had no children or grandchildren in this town. Nancy remembered her music teacher who traveled to help around the house and was ashamed to take money from the old man. But the man taught them almost by force. All labor must be paid for. Not in an old man's tone of voice, he said. Besides, you'll insult me if you don't accept the money. I've worked honestly all my life at the university, and I'm not used to handouts. I may be well into my 80s, but I'm not in need of a caregiver. Nancy took his words with respect and accepted the money. She knew very well what pride was, because that was why she had left her husband. She couldn't live with a traitor anymore. Gradually, her life got back to normal. Nancy got a few regular clients and received a good salary. She could even rent a small apartment in the suburbs. But Betty, she had the strength not to. I'm too used to your company, said her friend. I won't be able to do it alone. Stay, please. At this, Betty looked at her with such a pitiful look that Nancy melted. But how could she refuse? A few days later, it became clear that her friend had other plans besides relieving her boredom. Back home, one evening, Nancy found a strange man in the kitchen, fiddling with a faucet. Hello, Nancy said uncertainly. Who are you and where are you? Betty? The man looked at her and smiled. The stranger looked to be about 50, but it was the smile and the dimples on his cheeks that gave him a boyish look. The landlady? The man asked. She's in the bathroom. I was just fixing your faucet. Betty said it was leaking. Nancy nodded and went into the bathroom. Something about this whole thing was bugging her. She knocked on the bathroom door and called out to her friend. Betty, can I talk to you for a minute? You opened the door for her and smiled in your dressy gown as if you were going to some kind of celebration. There you are, said your friend cheerfully. There'll be your room and change. We'll have dinner now. What about the faucet? Nancy asked. I thought it was fine this morning. Anything else you can think of? Nothing at all. Betty assured her. I thought there was a gasket in there, so I invited Liam to take a look. I don't think you called Liam in for another reason, said Nancy. Admit it, did you take up matchmaking? Yes, but Betty didn't expect me to. You could have asked my permission, because I'm against it. But you haven't even met him. Her friends started to reassure her. Take a closer look at him, and we'll have a conversation. You'll see. Liam is a good man. But life has been hard on him. Wife left him, no kids. It all reminds me of something Nancy muttered. The other Alex. Good men don't get dumped, Betty. And you know that very well. I know Liam even better, objected her friend. He's lived next door for 5 years. He's a good man. Loves kids. Works at the school as a physical education teacher. But his wife left him on her own. Everyone in the yard knows it. She had an affair with some coach. And she was such an athlete lover. Nancy shook her head and sighed, I don't know, Behia. I've already been burned once, and I don't want to try a second time. And it's too late. What novels at 45? And now you insulted me. Betty reminded me of my age. You should have put us down as pensioners. You're out of your mind. I'll be there to chat with Liam. I'll be there for you. No one's forcing you to go to the registry office. Liam called out to the girl's friends. Where are you? Is the job done? Can you accept? Nancy soon began to lie down unhappily and threatened Betty with a finger. I'll remind you of that. They returned to the kitchen. The man with the look of a birthday boy showed them the faucet. Everything works, doesn't leak. It'll last another 50 years. You can be sure of that. Thank you very much, Liam, smiled Betty. We've had a lot of trouble with that faucet. I don't know who we would have called for help if it hadn't been for you. It was nothing, Liam said. It wasn't even a problem. My help wasn't needed. Nancy was surprised to realize that the man seemed unaware of the devious plan. She had thought that he had come to make the match, but it turned out that it had been entirely Betty's initiative. Well, if all is well, let's go to the table, Betty called them. Nancy, what are you standing there for? Take off your coat and sit down. This, too, was not at all as tedious as Nancy had feared. Liam did not pester her with intrusive expectations, nor did Betty make any hints of them. They were gathered around the same table like a group of old friends. How do you know all this? Nancy asked with interest. When Liam told them another story about Africa. You've been there. Traveled there a lot in your life? Yes, rather. A lot of watching the travel club and reading books, the man replied. At one time I had to spend a whole year in bed. I had to keep myself busy. Liam had been in a car accident a few years ago, Betty explained. And since then, he's become a real professor and philosopher. To be honest, I'm afraid to talk to him. I seem like a dormant ignoramus to myself. Nancy understood that her friend was thus emphasizing another advantage of her beau. Look, they say the hand of shame is also smart, and also pressed on pity. Who would not sympathize with a person who had suffered this terrible trauma? Nancy, and indeed, empathized with Vitaly, but her heart was silent. For her, this man remained a pleasant interlocutor, and only she hoped that everything would end there. But her friend invited Liam again and again for Sunday pie, for example, or to fix another broken appliance. And the equipment broke down more and more often. Nancy marveled at Betty's talent. Breaking things. How could you break a refrigerator that had worked for at least 30 years? She asked. And break a closet door? Betty, don't you think your efforts will backfire? Liam will consider us idiots, whose hands grew from the wrong place, and will leave us with another broken kettle. He won't, my friend waved me off. Men like to play nights, and Liam's pretty good at it. You'll see he's not off the hook. The man really didn't show any surprise at their endless failures. He dutifully showed up, tidied up the next broken thing, and smiled modestly. It's no big deal. What kind of work is that? Nancy wondered how he was still not bored of working with her husband for an hour. The woman herself was beginning to get bored with her new position. She'd been helping people around the house for about a year now, and Nancy wanted more. I'll look for a proper job again, she promised herself. Otherwise, I'll really end up doing nothing but cleaning and cooking. In the meantime, she was waiting for another call. The man's voice sounded tired. Some kind of children's music was playing in the background. Nancy struggled to make out the address and set off. A typical apartment building on the outskirts of town. Even from the outside, it looked dreary. It didn't even feel like walking in, let alone living here. Nancy went up to the 5th floor and knocked on the door. It wasn't opened right away. There was still music playing and water running in the apartment. The woman feared she hadn't been heard when footsteps sounded outside the door. Good afternoon. You, Nancy? The man hesitated when he saw who was in front of him. Nancy could not find words either, staring into her husband's face. They were silent for a while. And then Alex hesitantly said hi. Nancy continued to stare at her husband. He had lost a lot of weight, so the old homemade t-shirt she had bought him a couple of years ago was hanging baggy. Alex had a new wrinkle on his forehead that she wanted to see with her finger. And he was wearing something. His gaze faded. This was a completely different person than the one she knew. Alex made a second, unsure attempt at dialogue and asked how you found me. What do you mean you didn't realize, Nancy? You called me yourself, called your wife for an hour, said you needed some help with the cleaning. What? Adriana can't do it on her own anymore? What's that got to do with it? The man was surprised. Wow. It turns out I called you without realizing it. Can you believe it? I would never have believed such a coincidence. If someone had told me about it, I just picked the first ad I saw. I saw Nancy's name and I called. but I had no idea it would be you." Nancy didn't know why she was listening to all this. She wanted to run away and stay at the same time, but she couldn't move, as if she were frozen in place. Uncle Alex called out in a childish voice from the room, "Come here. I made it." Now Ben responded with a man. "Wait a minute, Ben," startled, asked Nancy. "Where did the child come from? Why don't we talk in the apartment?" Alex suggested softly. "It's too cold in the entryway, and this is not the place for such conversations." He gently took Nancy under his elbow and dragged her into the apartment. She was too surprised to resist. "Uncle Alex, where are you?" The little angry boy stepped into the hallway and looked sternly first at Alex, then at Nancy. "You see, this young man and I have erected a dwelling house, and you came in the middle of it. Let's see how Ben did, and then we'll talk." Nancy separated herself and went into the room. She didn't know why she was doing all this, probably just wanted to see what was going on. The boy led them into a room and showed them a rather large color. Standing there was a house made out of a construction set. Nancy noticed the red cross on the roof and realized it was a hospital. "Uncle Alex works here," he said trustingly, looking at his guest. "And Ben lives on the first floor. We agreed that we would build an ordinary residential house." Alex said reproachfully, "Why these crosses?" "Mom said that all people are born and die in the hospital," said the boy stubbornly. "So they live there too." "I lived there too. Can't you remember that?" Alex said in a steady voice. "It was a long time ago, and you were very small." "But I remember," the boy objected. Nancy looked at him and could not find words. The boy was about 5 years old, and this wise-cracking tone did not suit him at all. "Alex, what's going on?" Nancy asked quietly. "Let's go to the kitchen. I'll tell you everything," nodded the husband and added, addressing the boy Ben, "And you clean up here. I have enough hospitalization at work. I don't want to see him at home too." He led Nancy into the kitchen and sat her down at the table. Then he asked for tea, nothing more to offer. "We finished the buckwheat porridge with Ben, and I hadn't had time to make anything else. I don't need anything." The woman mumbled, "Thank you." She took a quick glance around the kitchen and realized that there was no female hand here. Whoever Ben's mother was, she didn't live in this apartment. Alex poured himself some tea and stared thoughtfully into the cup. Then he asked his wife, "Did you leave because of Adriana?" "Somehow she found out I was going to see her." Nancy nodded. She was surprised at the candor and didn't want to respond with a lie. "I didn't cheat on you," Alex muttered. "Although, of course, I should have told you right away. Lying isn't good either. Adriana had cancer." What didn't Nancy believe? "I'm sorry, I didn't know." She was really shocked by the news. It was impossible to imagine Adriana in any other guise than health and blooming. "She died a few months ago," Alex continued. "You could say that the doctors gave up on Adriana at my hands, said that she had no chance. And then she found me, knew I was a cardiologist, and that even I'm related to this topic, and she asked me to help anyway. Adriana didn't want to go into hospice. She wanted to spend her last days with her son. I helped her as much as I could. But why didn't you say anything to me? Why did you have to hide all this? I didn't know how you felt about me helping her. You know how it looked from the outside, like I was dating my first love, with some far-reaching intentions. Adriana didn't want to hear of any of her former acquaintances seeing her sick and tired. She wished to remain beautiful in your memory. And by the way, she sends her regards to you. She said she was very happy that many years ago everything turned out this way. She said we were the perfect couple. She lived her whole life like a tumbleweed. Ben was the most important man in her life. She asked that you and I adopt him. We don't have kids of our own anyway." The boy's father asked Nancy quietly. "I don't even know who that man is," Alex said. Adriana didn't give his name. She seemed to have had quite a tumultuous life, and Ben's father didn't live with her for long. Tears came to Nancy's eyes, tormented by pity for Adriana, for herself, for Alex. "Why are you living here now?" she asked in a place like this. "What made you move? When you left me, I decided. Anyway, Adriana had one chance in 1,000. We could try to send her to an overseas clinic. I traded our apartment for a smaller one, but there was no time to help Adriana. It was all for nothing. I lost you and I didn't help her. Ben's voice came from the room. Uncle Alex, I fixed it. Look at this sudden meeting. Continued to roll around in her head all the way home. However, Nancy didn't really know where her home was anymore. At Betty's apartment, or in this uncozy apartment building, where two men were waiting for her. Misfit men, one very young and the other an adult, but never learned to live on their own. The only thing Nancy was entirely sure of was that she would be able to fix everything by all means. As she approached a familiar entranceway, a shadow separated from behind a tree. The woman gasped in surprise. Liam, you scared me. What are you doing here? Just smoking, the man answered. And I was waiting for you. Say, can we talk? Nancy laughed. She guessed what it would be about and didn't want to give Vitaly empty hopes. Especially now that after all this time she had finally met Alex. About what? She asked cautiously about your friend Bettia. With unprecedented rudeness answered the man. You see, I've been coming to see you for weeks, and I can't understand why she does all this, why she breaks everything she touches. Nancy asked. It was Liam who nodded. It's not hard for me to subdue it all, of course. I just wanted to know if she likes me or what. Such timid hope was written on his face that Nancy could hardly keep from laughing. That was it. As Betty grabbed the man to her friend, he took a closer look at herself. The matchmaker turned out to be a more enviable bride than the one she wanted to matchmake. You know, I think she definitely likes you, said Nancy without the slightest twinge of disbelief. Do you have a chance at a happy life? We all do. As she climbed the stairs, Nancy almost sang with joy. She could see the future quite clearly. Husband, son, quiet family life. And this pleasant routine was no longer as irritating as it had been. And anyway, who says true love has to blaze blue? Sometimes you have to go through a storm to love your safe harbor. And barring the element of sadness over Adriana's death, Nancy thought it was all for the best. She had found her family again and vowed never to lose it again.